I got pondering on a few pieces this week, and dot connectors came up. And here is an example of it. This is called Hellmouth, all one word, or the jaws of hell. Is the entrance to hell envisaged as the gaping mouth of a huge monster, an image which first appeared in Anglo-Saxon art and then spread all over Europe. And it remained very common in depictions of the Last Judgment and the harrowing of hell until the end of the Middle Ages, and still sometimes used during the Renaissance and also after. Now, it did enjoy something of a revival in the polemical popular prints after the Protestant Reformation. Protestant is not a religion, by the way. When figures from the opposite side would be shown disappearing into the mouth. A notable late appearance is in the two versions of a painting by El Greco of about 1578, and political cartoons of the time showed Napoleon leading his troops into one, the Hellmouth. Now, medieval theatre often had Hellmouth prop or mechanical devices, which was used to attempt to scare the audience by vividly dramatising an entrance to hell. And these seem often to have featured in a battlemented castle entrance in paintings usually associated with heaven. Now, the oldest example of an animal hellmouth known to Maya Shapiro was an ivory carving of circa 800 in the Victoria and Albert Museum, and he says most examples before the 12th century were English. Many show the harrowing of hell, which appealed to an Anglo-Saxon taste as a successful military raid by Christ. Shapiro speculates that the image may have been drawn from the pagan myth of the crack of doom, with the mouth that of the wolf monster Fenrir, slain by Vidar, who is used as a symbol of Christ on the Gosforth cross, and other pieces of Anglo-Scandinavian art. Christ symbolized by a wolf. Now, in English, crack of doom is an old term used for the day of judgment, referring in particular to the blast of trumpets, signalling the end of the world in chapter 8 of the book of Revelation. A crack had the sense of any loud noise, preserved in the phrase a crack of thunder, and doom was a term for the last judgment, as doomsday still is. More biblical fear-mongering to me. And in the assimilation of the Christianized Viking populations in northern England, the church was surprisingly ready to allow the association of pagan mythological images with Christian ones in hogback grave markers, for example. The church are based on paganism and ritual sacrifices. Why? Now, in the Anglo-Saxon Vercelli Homilies 4:46 through 48, Satan is likened to a dragon swallowing the damned. They never come out of the pits of snakes and of the throat of the dragon, which is called Satan. Now, the whale monster, the Leviathan, translated from Hebrew, Job 41:1, is described as a wreathed animal, has been equated with this description, although it's hard to confirm in the earliest appearances. However, in The Whale, an Old English poem from the Exeter book, the mouth of hell is compared to a whale's mouth. The whale has another trick. When he is hungry, he opens his mouth and a sweet smell comes out. Sounds like Hathor. Now the fish are tricked by the smell and they enter the whale's mouth, and suddenly the whale's jaw closes. Likewise, any man who lets himself be tricked by a sweet smell and led to sin will go into hell, opened by the devil, if he has followed the pleasures of the body and not those of the spirit. When the devil has brought them to hell, he clashes the jaws together, the gates of hell. No one, it is said, can get out from them, just as no fish can escape the mouth of the whale. Now, later in the Middle Ages, the classical Cerberus, the three-headed chimera, also became associated with the image, although it's hardly likely that the Anglo-Saxons had him in mind. Now, Satan himself is often shown sitting in hell eating the damned, but according to G.D. Smith, this is a separate image, and the Hellmouth should not be considered to be the mouth of Satan. The Hellmouth never bites the damned, remaining wide open, ready for more, he said. Now, in general, the motif had fallen from favour in Italy and the Netherlands by the late 14th century, and is rarely seen in the many Last Judgments in early Netherlandish paintings, but in the late medieval works by Hieronymus Bosch and his followers, where the wide interior of hell is shown, there is often a hell mouth leading to some special compartment, and it continued in use in Germany and France. The Hellmouth appears swallowing a bishop at bottom left in The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, a famous woodcut by Albrecht Dürer, 1497-1498. So here is the reasoning behind doing that piece. 3 separate events, all coalescing together. There was a G7 summit in Cornwall, England this past week, and during the summit, a man died on the cliffs located near the summit. The name of the cliffs? Hell's Mouth. One has to ask, was that a sacrifice? But just as we spoke of the whale connected to Hell's Mouth, and just by a massive coincidence, this story appears this week. A Cape Cod lobsterman who claimed he survived nearly being swallowed by a whale says he could see Matt Damon, the Good Will Hunting star and fellow Massachusetts native, portraying him in a potential Netflix movie about his harrowing tale. Michael Packard, 56, added to fans asking him questions on Reddit on Saturday that people have taken to calling him the obvious Jonah, and describing how hospital doctors responded when he told them what happened. I said I got stuck in a whale's mouth and all the nurses and doctors at the hospital came to see me and asking me about it. Some Packard families are connected directly to the Ellites. Ain't that right, Tom? Hell's Mouth sacrifice, whale swallowing man, Jonah story, and asking Matt Damon, or is it Demon, Daemon, to play his part in an acting role, all in the same week. It is often said all the world's a stage and everyone is an actor in a role. These events prove it. It's all pure theatre and illusion, replaying scenes and acts from a very old movie script these elitist clowns love to play. Exposé. And this is a bit of a follow-up on last week's piece about Jews and Judaism in China. And they are predominantly composed of Sephardi Jews and their descendants. And other Jewish ethnic divisions are also represented, including Ashkenazi Jews, Mizrahi Jews, and a number of converts. Now, the Jewish Chinese community manifests a wide range of Jewish cultural traditions, and it also encompasses the full spectrum of Jewish religious observance. Though a small minority of Chinese Jews have had an open presence in the country since the arrival of the first Jewish immigrants during the 8th century CE. Relatively isolated community of Jews developed from ancient all the way to modern China, most notably the Kaifeng Jews, Kaifeng, and that is the term the Chinese Jews is often used in a restricted sense in order to refer to these communities. Now, Kaifeng, the name literally means opening the border, and figuratively hidden and vengeance. Sounds apt to me. Now, in the 19th and early 20th centuries, Jewish merchants from around the world began to trade in Chinese ports, particularly in the commercial centres of Hong Kong, which was for a time a British colony. It still is. Shanghai, the international settlement and French concession, and Harbin, the Trans-Siberian Railway. And in the first half of the 20th century, thousands of Jewish refugees escaping from pogroms in the Russian Empire arrived in China. Those pogroms were not as recorded. Remembering From Russia with Love, we spoke of them bringing settlers or refugees in to do mass destruction on the people, particularly in Armenia. Once they'd fulfilled their role, they were like paid assassins, in essence. Once they fulfilled their role, they threw them all out. And that's what those pogroms were. Dead people don't talk. Once the elites have got what they wanted. Now, by the time of the establishment of the People's Republic of China in 1949, only a few Jews were known to have maintained the practice of their religion and culture. A bit like the Dongmei then, they went underground. And China's Jewish communities have been ethnically diverse, ranging from the Jews of Kaifeng and all other ports. Remember we mentioned about the ports earlier, throughout China. And it is reported that they came to be more or less totally assimilated into the majority Han Chinese populace due to widespread intermarriage, especially during the Ming dynasty. A common elite theme now, and was also confirmed by Rosenthal and Finkelstein. And in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, however, some international Jewish groups, most notably Shavei Israel, which is a non-profit foundation, have helped Chinese Jews rediscover their Jewish heritage and reconnect with their Jewish roots. Why would they need to rediscover their Jewish heritage? Oh, there I go again, common sense. Perhaps it's re-brainwash is a more appropriate term. Now, China's first contact with the Jewish people came as a result of the development of the Silk Road an ancient trade route linking China with the Middle East and Europe that was created during the Han Dynasty in 206 BCE and incorporated existing trade routes that were established 200 years earlier by the Persian Achaemenid Empire. Actually, the Silk Road was ran by the Jewish traders, not Chinese, something we revealed in From Russia with Love plus 56 or whatever the numbers we're up to now. 8 maybe, don't know. And the first wave of Jews in China travelled from West Asia, over the Silk Road and by sea via India during the Tang Dynasty 618-907 CE. It wasn't via India, it was from India, the sub-grey race. And the fact that they travelled by sea during the 6th to the 9th century CE backs up an earlier claim that the Spanish conquistadors who attacked natives in America and Central America were the Sephardic Jews who were expelled from Iberia. Which again, Finkelstein proved. And they consisted of Babylonian and Persian Jews who travelled along the Silk Road and received the Tang Emperor's blessing to reside in Kaifeng. They eventually formed a distinct Kaifeng Jewish community during the Song Dynasty, where many eventually became prominent civil servants, doctors, rabbis, and businessmen. They eventually assimilated into the Chinese culture, learned the language, and began to intermarry with the Han's Chinese populace. Other Western scholars speculate that the first wave of Jewish settlements in China may have arrived even earlier during the later Han Dynasty, 25 to 220 CE. No, they were there 5,000 to 7,000 years ago, after they were thrown out of the Garden of Eden, which coincides with the Roman persecution of Judean Jews after the Romans destroyed the temple at Jerusalem in 70 CE, and the presence of a community of Jewish immigrants in China is consistent with the history of the Jewish people during the first and second millennia, which saw them disperse and settle throughout the Euro-Asian landmass, with an especially large concentration of Bukharan Jews settling throughout Central Asia. Bukharan comes from Uzbekistan, and they are part of those thrown out of the Indian Garden of Eden. Now, by the 9th century, the Persian geographer Ibn Khordadbeh noted the travels of Jewish merchants called Radhanites, whose trade took them to China via the Silk Road through Central Asia and also India. And he mentioned the presence of Jewish merchants in a number of Chinese cities and the important economic role they played transporting merchandise as well as transmitting scientific and technological expertise by land and sea. Where did that scientific and technological expertise come from, I might add? All the way from Spain and France via the Middle East to China. Now, the medieval Italian explorer Jacob of Ancona, the supposed author of a book of travels, was a scholarly Jewish merchant who wrote in vernacular Italian and reached China in 1271, although some authors are questioning its veracity. But during the period of China's opening of the West and British quasi-colonialism, the first group to settle in China were Jews who arrived in China under British protection following the First Opium War. And was Jerusalem builded here in England's green and pleasant land? Perhaps that song will have a different meaning now. And many of these Jews were of Indian or Iraqi origin. What is said due to significant British colonialism in these regions. The reality is it's got nothing to do with colonialism. It's where they were from. And the second community came in the first decades of the 20th century, when many Jews arrived in Hong Kong and Shanghai during those cities' periods of economic expansion. Remember, this was just after the Fed took over the banking system in America. And what these people, who it has been referenced, they played an important economic role, knowing that in 100 years' time, or so they thought, that the East and China was going to be the new Federal Reserve. These people plan long term. And many more Jews arrived as refugees from the non-Russian Revolution. It was the Bolsheviks and these Jewish elites, nothing to do with the ordinary Jewish people of 1917. And the surge of Jews and Jewish families was to arrive in the late 1930s and 40s for the purpose of seeking refuge from the Holocaust in Europe, and were predominantly of European origin. Now, Shanghai was notable for its special area assigned to Jewish refugees, most of whom left after the war, and the rest relocating prior or immediately after the establishment of the People's Republic of China. Remember, we covered last week of the Jewish involvement in the creation of the People's Republic of China in 1949. Communists has got nothing to do with China or Russia or Cuba. It's Zionism. Now, over the centuries, the Kaifeng community came to be virtually indistinguishable from the Han Chinese population, and is therefore no longer recognized by the Chinese government as a separate ethnic minority. This is as a result of having maintained already Jewish and adopted many Han's Chinese customs, including patrilineal descent and extensive intermarriage with the local Han population. Since their religious practices are considered to be functionally extinct, they are not eligible for expedited immigration to Israel under the law of return unless they explicitly convert. Really? So much for being, quote, one of God's chosen people then, unquote. Do as we say, or you're banished with the goyim, is basically what the law of return means. A cryptic and fitting song before the final piece.